Welcome, Denise, and welcome to our audience, those of you who are joining us today. I'm Ricky Quintana, the founder of Hunart's Fair Trade. Denise, put your video back on. You can't cheat. Uh, this is a conversation, not a presentation. Uh, for those of you who haven't joined us before, as I said, I'm the founder of Hunart's Fair Trade. I work with artisans in Central Asia. Denise, who I've been highlighting, has worked with uh, Hunart's since we were founded in 2014. I forget the date sometimes. And she's been a volunteer, she's been a contractor, and she's always been a friend and a supporter. And she's moving on to a full-time job, so I'm not going to have her anymore as my regular chief collaborator. But Denise introduced me to Stephanie, and she seemed a perfect uh, collaborator to interview for our Conscious Collaboration Circle. And if you haven't heard of the Conscious Collaboration Circle, or you haven't joined us before, this is just a space for small social impact organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, or otherwise, to dialogue and discuss how we can come together and use collaboration to build an alternative business ecosystem that is dedicated to empowering people and the environment over profit. So today I'm very excited to welcome Stephanie Calver. She's coming to us all the way from Calgary, Canada. What's the temperature like there right now?
Just come out of a heat wave, so we're thankful to have rain.
Stephanie is a consultant, a coach, a meeting facilitator. Oh, we have somebody else joining us. Let me admit them here as well. And Stephanie's work is all around empowering people for leadership to have a greater impact in the world of sustainability. I'll let Stephanie tell you more about that. Before we go, I want to, though, I'm running the tech myself, so I have to figure out how to spotlight Stephanie. There we go. There we go. So you're now the star, Stephanie. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your story? We were talking before we went on about your business is relatively new and you spent 20 years doing something else. So what led you to where you are, and how did you get here?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for the invitation in. And before we begin, I'll just share in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth. I'll acknowledge I'm also joining from Treaty 7 territory, which is known as Mohkinstsis in Calgary, Alberta. So I always like to start and honor my place in the world and all of those who have been stewards of this land in the past, in the present, and the future. And yeah, I have almost 20 years before diving in fully to my business. And, you know, speaking from a place of collaboration, when I look back from a young age, entrepreneurship it bit me early, let's say. So it was actually a neighbor when I was younger who invited me to a craft fair. And so I always like going back that far because, you know, I was a kid and I was making friendship bracelets and selling fudge and doing all that stuff. And it was thanks to somebody else's invitation in. And I always appreciate that in collaboration, we're constantly noticing, where are we being invited? Where are we being called? And that's different at different stages of our life. So I'll just start with that note. But I like to frame the last 20 years and what has led me here in two different phases. So that's where I'll start. And I lived with a family on a farm when I was completing my undergrad and ended up being offered some amazing growth opportunities. I had literally walked down the lane and been looking for work doing my undergrad, and ended up coming across the stable to learn to ride and became a horseback rider in my early career. And within a couple of years of being in the saddle, I actually transitioned into running a series of horse shows for 5 years, which taught me a lot about leadership and being a consultant, being somebody who really contracted and stepped in and supported that process. So from a very young age, took on some leadership there, and stepped in to become a competition coach for most of my 20s in the equestrian world, and really was given those opportunities by a number of different mentors and partners and some real fabulous women who wanted to create an ecosystem of different riders. And so for a lot of my 20s, I was at a facility that had about 5 different coaches. And again, we look at conscious collaboration. We would bring our students together and we would run days that were about building trust and team building and that type of thing. And again, from a young age, I was put in the role of facilitator and really kind of there to be intentional on how we showed up and how we worked together. I also spent a few years in my 20s at the Canadian Sport Institute, which piqued an interest in me on human potential and growth, and really looking at our mandate was to support and nurture from grassroots sport all the way up to podium level performance. And so personally, I was an athlete through this stage of my life, and it was really neat to work in an institute that had so many networks and so many partners. We had Pacific Sport Institutes all over the province. We were leading up to the 2010 Olympics at the time, so you could really get the charge of, Canadian communities and how much we were rallying for our athletes. So I really found a genuine love of the process of coaching and high performance and supporting others, really to reach different pathways to what high potential meant for them. So that would be the first phase of my life and my career that's led me here. My second phase is when I moved to Calgary, and I actually jumped into higher education. And so I worked at the University of Alberta in executive education for about 7 years. And in that time was really inspired by a number of leadership coaches and executive coaches, and really seeing the transformation they could bring when they spent the time and went deeper with people and challenged them and really had them live life on purpose. So for me, this is probably one of the biggest pivotal times of my life and the biggest growth times of my life. And we always like to say executive education was, it offered us opportunities to be entrepreneurs in education. So even though it was higher education, it was very entrepreneurial, and we partnered with many different universities down in Texas and, different areas around the world. So again, I think for me, my view on conscious collaboration, when I reflect on it, it's really bubbled up at a number of different points. And when I started at executive education, coaching itself was still a very fledgling profession, I'll say. It was still becoming more known. It was something that was given more to the senior level staff and to executive level staff. And when I wrapped up my term at executive education, we saw it to be almost like a badge of honor, right? We were chosen for coaching and it was open for us, and we're being developed, right? We're being invested in. And I think there was such a beautiful energy there. And so seeing that lifeline and seeing the timeline, maybe is a better word, of where coaching had gone as a profession, I became quite inspired and saw how it worked for so many different individuals and so many different levels of nonprofits and governments and corporations. So I ended up doing my training and launched my business from there, which I'll talk more about.
So was
ahead.
there any particular event that had you say, okay, I can't put it off any longer, I need to shift gears and start my own business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I hit a point where I had that entrepreneurial calling again, and it had been coming back to me after spending so much of my 20s, coaching equestrian and all the different pieces. And it was a conversation or two with another coach who worked with me who nudged me, right? There's always those people in our lives, and she used to just leave books on my desk for me. And I realized I wanted to build leadership development and training and coaching in a way that was maybe accessible to different populations and in a way where I could really partner more intentionally with other coaches. And I had just completed a master's in global leadership and had my eyes open to different levels of accessibility in the global north and south, and really was examining, all the opportunities I've had in my life. And I just felt called, like, this is the time to start offering this, to different communities and to share what I've learned and how I've grown and really build my own network. I think there was just such a strong calling there.
So who do you serve, and what do you provide? Who are your clients, and what do you provide that's different from the now everybody's a coach?
Yes,
uh,
absolutely.
but I know you have the sustainability um, filter. So what does that look like in real life on the ground?
Yes. Well, and thank you for the question. And, I created my business because I've been inspired by some very influential leaders and seen them really take a stand and create something new. And I really appreciate that intentional focus. And I believe that anybody can be a leader, right? If we have some time and space and we are very intentional about it. So most of the people I work with right now are females and entrepreneurs and change makers and innovators, and a lot in higher education as well. So it is interesting, right? All of our network and connection continues to be built as we build new pieces. And what I really look to do is to help others create a shared vision of a more regenerative future, and to look at, what are some of those systems that we might want to be disrupting, and what are we shifting, and how are we really looking at a future that is more based in well-being and collaboration and regeneration. And so as a coach, when things get tough, it's helping build those inner resources to help them work through. And I'll share one other piece. I had started my business and I was, rocking and rolling for a few months, and then ended up having a really amazing job land on LinkedIn. And I just said, I have to take this job. It's so cool. So I did a stint in sustainability at the Office of Sustainability at a local university. And that really accelerated not only my focus on leadership and coaching, but embracing leadership and exploring sustainability and what does it mean to create regenerative futures. And I look at that time and say, that was a crash course in all things sustainability, whether it was the built environment and, LEED buildings and learning about fair trade and really just examining what could a fair, just, and sustainable society look like. And I recognized a pain point there that a lot of people, they're not sure where to start, right? We're not sure how to interact. We're not confident to take the actions. If it's not perfect, we're not sure that we can do it. And so that's also a big piece in the work that I do. And I offer an online course, which is Inspiring Your Leader Within. And it is really about, again, exploring sustainability, really becoming present to the future, looking at a regenerative leadership style and worldview. And then I do some one-on-one coaching and group coaching as well. So it's a blend right now.
Sustainability is another one of those words that is used a lot. You see it in the news, you hear it on podcasts. What's your definition of sustainability?
I do really appreciate the creating a world where 7 generations in the future, if anything, we've left the place better than we found it. And we've lived in a way that is in alignment with regenerative principles and values and well-being. I think there's a very important piece around well-being, and that's for all living beings. And so I really, like to connect to nature and really pause and look again at that equity and fair representation as being key components within it.
So it's more than just environmental sustainability. It's really the whole picture.
Absolutely. And I will say, if anything, I had that lesson that I learned when I worked in higher education and really looking at the shift into the social pieces and looking more at things like accessibility and representation and some of the barriers and privilege and power and, spending time examining all of those pieces relates so directly to sustainability. And I think that there's so many more conversations we could have around that. And around the world, different parts of the world, we're having them, and there's still a long ways to go.
Absolutely. So you're a relatively new entrepreneur, but can you tell us something about the impact you're seeing from your work? And to make it really concrete, have you got a client or a project so people can really get what does this look like on the ground? Because there's talking about concepts and then there's seeing how it plays out in real life.
Yeah, I would say I've had a couple people, whether through coaching or through the course, that have really said, wow, I see my role as a leader, and I had never seen myself as a leader before. And so to me, that's a huge success and a huge impact. And helping them understand, leadership can be thought of in so many different ways, and there's so many different avenues to display leadership and as a role model, and to create that shared vision and the way that we influence others to really be in alignment with their values. So I would say that's one of the ones that stands out, is really encouraging and seeing people take on bigger projects or kind of step up to play bigger in their lives. And to also take that ownership, right? There's a level of ownership there to really say, I see some of those pain points. I see how it's not working, and actually I can make that difference. And I think that's such an important piece. And the other one I'll add to that is I've had a few people say, I also realize I can't do it alone, right? Yes, I can step towards leadership and we can move towards sustainability, and I need to bring people with me. So I would say those are some of the big learnings that I so appreciate coming to.
From my perspective, that concept of community and being able to make a difference, no matter how tiny your piece of the puzzle is really inspiring to me, because I'm one of those tiny companies. But I had one of my artisans describe me a couple of weeks ago in an online event we were doing. She said, Ricky has been our ambassador to the US for Tajik handicrafts. And while my sales have not been enormous, that role as a catalyst has really started to, that sense of being a catalyst and part of a new ecosystem where it's no longer just about being the biggest in your industry, in your region, but it's about being a catalyst for a whole new way of doing business and running the world.
Yes, and I would add, what I also so appreciate seeing other people step into is amplifying not only their voice, but other people's voices, and reimagining what leadership could be. and even looking at things that are more collaborative in the leadership sense of shared leadership or distributed leadership, or asking others to co-chair or to co-lead, or how do we become more generative and what leadership really looks like. And I think there's such power in that right now.
Mhm. One thing that really caught my eye in your bio and in your introduction was acknowledging the First Nation uh, in Canada. Can you just talk a little bit more about um, the Canadian world of relationships with the First Nations? Because I get the sense, I don't really know, but I get the sense that it's much uh, more developed than what we have in the US.
Yeah, I can share from my experience, and what I will say is I invite those that I know who are themselves Indigenous into my courses and, in as guest speakers. And I really think it's important for me to create opportunities where I can to really connect and again, build and amplify voices. And in Canada, what I would recommend is if you're interested, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has 94 calls to action. And again, taking a review, taking a look at those. The Truth and Reconciliation report is about 300 pages, and there are many different concepts and pieces to interact with. And there are also some fabulous resources through the U of A where I had gone. One is an online free course, or you can take it, I think, for $60 or so, called Indigenous Canada. So what I would say is I think we're making progress in some areas, and I do see, if anything, more awareness and perhaps advocacy. And I always like to take the stance of there's more to learn, right? There's some really amazing resources that have come out in the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm always happy to share more of those down the road. But if anything, from my perspective in my business, it's honoring the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's looking for ways to engage, and also who's not in the room, who's not being represented. And for me to become really curious about that and look at ways to invite different groups in.
It's a very different model than we have in the US in terms of relationships with the Indigenous communities. I obviously can't speak for the Indigenous communities in the US, but as an observer and as a citizen, there's no sense, I don't see a sense in the US of really bringing that global sense of community to the table. It's a transactional kind of relationship. So I love the idea of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it's very much aligned, that concept is very much aligned with the Hunart's vision of unity in diversity, appreciating the diversity and yet recognizing and building a community that works for all of us.
Yes. And I would add, I think each and every person, if you're on this call or if you're watching at a later point, do some of the work to really decolonize your own mindset and to be open to different ways of knowing and different ways of hearing and different ways of learning. And that might mean that you're opening yourself up to more oral traditions and storytelling. It might mean that you're opening up again to those invitations and communities that you work with. And if anything, I've been really fortunate. What I've learned from some of the communities I've worked with is they've helped me value and appreciate that intergenerational, across generation mindset. And even in the course that I offer, that's a real goal for me, to have people that are from 20 to 70 years old, or anywhere within, or beyond. And the value that that really brings in the conversations and the knowledge and the passing on of wisdom, and looking and learning to appreciate and respect our elders, right? There's something about the 7th-generation thinking that I think, again, based on both of our businesses, we can really honor and respect and learn more about.
So as a new but not brand new entrepreneur, what are some of the biggest challenges you've faced as an entrepreneur?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first one that comes to mind for me is actually just financing and investing in my own learning and development. And it's a funny one because you feel like you really need to invest everything into your business. And only recently, I think one of the light bulbs that came on for me was, you are your biggest asset. And it's so important to keep up with those training and the communities of practice and that investment in yourself. And so I would really encourage others, don't push that to the side. There's so much that can be done to really help support you and grow you. And again, you can do a lot to invest in yourself that is cost effective, whether it's mentorship, or I've taken lots of courses on Coursera and that type of thing. So I'd say that's probably my first challenge, because I'm a lifelong learner and I love learning. And so that was also a permission piece to give myself as an entrepreneur to keep fresh and keep relevant. The other one that comes to mind is, disrupting traditional systems that can feel very big and very heavy and very slow moving, and recognizing it really is one conversation at a time. And so I would say that's probably my key takeaway. Whatever you're working towards, if it's looking at, building more equitable programs or services, or if it's looking at accessibility or different things, it's really one conversation at a time, and trusting, the more you do that, there will be a groundswell, there will really be some energy. And to share, when we're disrupting things that have been very traditional, share some of the current data, share some of the current facts, share resources, right? There's a lot of really good stuff out there with different thought leaders and institutions and think tanks. And so again, that comes back to my constant learning piece, overcoming some of the challenges by staying up to date and keeping your learning going.
That learning that, let's see, as I said, I'm managing the tech myself. So Denise is giving me hints, and I'm not doing a great job. I was trying to do it.
You did it.
Okay, great. The learning that patience is really tough, but like you, I'm learning that for our kinds of businesses that have a 7-generation horizon, that we can't follow the old models, and we have to stop beating ourselves up over not achieving the goals that the old business models would have you aspire to, creating certain levels of revenue and growth instantly, and it's much slower when you have a much bigger vision than just putting money in the bank.
Yes, and I would add, I have been coached to reframe my KPIs from a place that comes from values and to use language that very much is attached to my mission and my values. And so I would encourage others to consider that as well. You know, we know all of these business terms and pieces that support us, but really give yourself some time to simmer in your values and your mission and your purpose, and consider how that overlays, the language can overlay into things like KPI and tracking.
Absolutely. As we before we started the live broadcast, we were talking a little bit about the genesis for CCC, and it was really my frustration during the pandemic of seeing the big guys get bigger during the pandemic and the little guys get lost in the noise. And it's for in the fair trade world, the larger companies seem to be doing fine. The smaller companies are really struggling because everything has gone online. Live events, they started to come back, and then Delta arrived. So no one knows what's going to happen over the next few months. So the pandemic brought a lot of things into focus for me about the way the current business ecosystem works. And it was my frustration and anger with that inspired me to start having these conversations. How has the pandemic impacted your business?
Mm-hmm. You know, it changed it completely. And so I started it 3 years ago part-time. And at that point in time, I really saw it to be localized, you know, Western Canada, BC, Alberta, much more in person, very more limited, I would actually say, to who I could serve, where the pandemic has opened it up for me. So I have people who join in from different parts of the world now. You know, I'm considering the time zones and really looking for my work to be more intentional, and also acknowledging things like, you know, in rural communities or certain communities, they may not have the best internet access. And so how do you set up different ways, or look at libraries, or look at other ways that people could engage with me as I seek to remove some barriers and look from a more global lens. It has shifted the business in that sense, and also really taking it upon myself, I guess, to reach out to others and say, who do you know who might not traditionally access this? And in many senses, it is that much more available, you know, to be able to do most of what I do through Zoom. And, you know, over the pandemic, I think I realized I do a lot of my creative thinking when I'm moving. So that was another little aha I had, that I missed my daily walks into work and around and all those things. But if anything, I've come to appreciate offering workshops and courses and pieces, even on Zoom, that offer embodiment and movement and really get people connected back out of their head and into their bodies. So that's another big lesson that I've had through the pandemic.
Great, great. So you talked about your past experiences with your network and collaboration, and how it led to you deciding to start your business. How has that served you in building your business?
Yeah, I would say it's been huge. And again, as a fairly newly minted entrepreneur, I would say learning to ask for help and to really reach out to people. And if not you, who, you know, who else do you know? Or really recognizing I have a diverse and very thoughtful and engaged network. And so people do appreciate learning what you're up to, and also saying, you know, how could I make your work more visible, or who do I know? When I've had some amazing connections come through, whether it's for a not-for-profit or an institute or people doing really great work. And so that has been fantastic. I only recently launched my online course, and already I'm having a number of alumni share it for me and, you know, put it out there. And I think that's just such a lovely piece to really see the community building and lifting other people up in that sense. And I'm part of a number of different community of practices. And so one is on regenerative leadership, and another is on weaving learning ecosystems and looking at, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. And so all those communities of practice challenge me, and they challenge me in a good way, right? There's that ongoing learning and really kind of pushing me out of my own comfort zone, but in a way where you build some real deep relationships. So I encourage others, you know, get involved, whether it's volunteering or communities of practice or whatever it is, and don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, I think that was the biggest shining piece right there. And maybe the final piece, a lot of those from my past have come back to be either a guest speaker or they might start co-facilitating. And so I'm really being conscious in who can I invite back? Whose story would I love to, you know, weave into the work here? And as I build different pieces, I'm still considering that, you know, it's very new and I have a vision for the next few years, but definitely how can I lift and amplify others' voices as well who are doing this work?
That's great. So, what's one important tip or piece of advice that you would give to someone else looking at starting a business or a nonprofit with a view to making a difference in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I won't go too external here. I'll actually say pause, you know, come back to that self-leadership piece and examine your own relationship with your voice of doubt or fear or that inner critic. And again, this is a coaching lens that I bring, that I recognize how it can really hamper us, it can trip us, right? It can kind of diminish what we were planning to do. So rather than letting that voice of doubt hold you back, question it. What's the evidence? Is it really true? What are the facts, right? Really do some of that inner work, because it's amazing how much that voice can come up and hold you back or keep you hidden, when really you need to be visible when you're starting these projects. So that's one piece. The flip side to that is get to know who you want to be. You know, who is that highest, most evolved person? What are the qualities? What does it look like? How can you really set your vision for who you want to be and the impact you want to make? And there's something about that that helps you bring inner wisdom and build that purpose-driven path forward and really be aligned to your values. So, and tap into your own inner resources, right? Really building those inner resources and just embodying that future self. The final piece I would add, if I know we're probably coming up to time here, I love the idea and the mindset of being on a learning journey. And so that's probably a mindset I would add, you know, be willing to experiment, be willing to take risks, consider whatever venture or project you're launching to be this learning journey and try new things. And we need more people in the world willing to do it imperfectly and engage, you know, and have that act of hope and confidence to try and to really be in it. So it makes it a bit more fun to take it from a mindset of a learning journey.
Your comments about mindset are so spot on. I'm 6 years into my entrepreneurial journey, and it was only a couple of years ago that I finally recognized for myself that mindset was an issue. Because when I started, my attitude was, well, I have a good work ethic. I know how to learn. I'm a hard worker. I have resources. I don't need to worry about mindset. And through a coaching program, I peeled back the layers for myself and realized how absolutely critical that that inner world is to your ultimate success in implementing your vision in the world. it's very frustrating and annoying that you can't just do the doing and have the impact that you want.
Well, as I'll share, I took a course ULab leading from the emerging future, and I think of an infinity loop. So if you imagine the infinity loop, and one is all about our inner resources, and then the other loop is about our external resources. And I always love to share that image because, again, what are we resourcing internally in our mindset and our beliefs and who we're being and what we're doing? And then there's all the external stuff over there, but both of them are as important as the other.
I love that image. So, if people want to learn more about what you do, take your course, consult, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I usually say LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn fairly easily. Leapingfoxconsulting.ca. I am up in Canada, or Instagram, I'm at Leaping Fox Coaching. So a few different ways to engage.
Great. So to wrap up the formal part of this conversation, if I say the words conscious collaboration, what does that look like for you? What does that bring to mind for you?
Yeah, you know, the first thing that came to mind was waking up to the fact that we are all interconnected and interdependent, and that that's really a beautiful thing. So, the beauty in it and being intentional in how we show up and align our callings and our vision, you know, and our gifts with others. I think there's something to that as well, to really invite others in, to collaborate, to partner. And by doing that, you're energizing each other. Which is how I felt today. So thank you for the invitation.
That is great. It's been delightful for me to talk to you, Stephanie, and I am excited to follow your journey. We do have another guest on the Zoom platform, and I wanted to invite Rebecca. If she has any questions, I'll be happy to unmute you. Rebecca, do you have any questions?
But I've just been really happy hearing the conversation and witnessing two women who have big, courageous steps in their lives to create something that is a vision in their heart, and that really inspires me. I guess just a comment, I really don't have a question, but one of the comments that I really appreciate that Stephanie made, and that you also, Ricky, alluded to, in terms of doing things differently, and in us,
we're
part of it.
Your voice broke up a little bit. Could you repeat that?
I'm actually in Guatemala, and our web, things are a little sketchy sometimes, but I was just saying that the great appreciation I have to witness two women that have chosen very conscientious business practices and who are following, a heart desire to do things differently. And to me, that's what we need more of. And in my neck of the world, where I'm kind of just beginning a brand new life, a brand new career from academics, having come back to the world of holistic arts from an academic world of arts education and teacher training, to recognize, again, one of the things that Stephanie said, which has to do with our inner lives. And until we're really connected and asking those difficult and challenging questions about who we are and what our intentions in the world are, until we have a little bit of clarity with that, and we have the buoyancy of the support underneath us to take big risks, very challenging. So until we root ourselves, and sometimes it takes time, and that time is scary, especially when you're trying to start a business, because as you've alluded to, Ricky, during COVID, all the big guys or the big women, there are some women out there too who are really, the bigger you know, we kind of feel like the outsiders or the ones that aren't going as fast. But let me just say, I think the wisdom is not in comparison, is in staying true to what we know. And the only way we know what we know is through our own internal experience. And again, we have to trust it. We have to trust that intuition. So thank you both for trusting that intuition and being models for those of us at the very baby steps of trying to do this thing of entrepreneurship. Even saying that word is scary to me. And that's a whole other class, a whole other course. But because it's about, you know, the why, the intention, towards what ends. And it sounds to me like both of you have a lot of clarity towards what ends. So thank you, Space Ricky. I appreciate the invitation from you, Stephanie. So thank you.
Well, hearing your comments, Rebecca, makes me very curious about what you're up to. So I'm hoping that Stephanie will introduce us by email, because it sounds like you might be a good candidate for a CCC interview down the road. So can I count on you to do that, Stephanie?
I'm happy to do that connection. Absolutely. I would love to hear Rebecca.
Well, we always go past the projected time, but I'm so glad, Rebecca, that you tuned in so that we could get your perspective and the ripple effects of the conversation. Is just so exciting to me to see these Canada, Guatemala. I'm just so excited to see how those ripple effects or the butterfly wings are having an impact that we can't even predict. So thank you both, and for those of you who tuned in on Facebook, thank you. We'll have this video up on our YouTube channel within about a week. You'll be able to review it on Facebook Live. And join us in a couple of weeks. We'll have another Facebook Live event. I'm not sure exactly what it is because we've sort of run out of the scheduled events. What we do typically for our Facebook Live events is we do a live stream every couple of weeks, and we alternate between a CCC conversation, a conscious collaboration circle conversation, and something that is stories and culture associated with the work of Hunarts. And I haven't chosen a topic for the next one, but I'm sure it will be something fun that probably you haven't heard about. So join us then. Thank you again, Stephanie, and thank you, Rebecca, for joining us as well. We'll see you next time.